All right, gear diff rebuilding time. Pretty straightforward. If you are converting from a ball diff vehicle to a gear diff on carpet and you've never built one before, naturally, like most RC products, they don't come with instructions. However, if you, and I'm talking about associated here, that's my only real frame of reference. If you're dealing with associated products and you're going to build an associated gear diff and you've never built one before, well, let's say you're converting a dirt car to a carpet car, you know you need a gear diff so that your ball diff doesn't get welded up in 2 laps. Find one of the associated vehicles that is not designated with the letter D for dirt. For example, a B6.3 as opposed to a B6.3D. So if you go to Associated's website and you download that manual, the B6.3 or the B6.4, as long as it doesn't have a D on it, it'll come with a gear diff, not a ball diff, and the instructions on how to build them will be in there. So that's what I follow. I'm going to bring you through it, and I'm going to point out 2 things that I think are important when doing these gear diffs. They're notorious for leaking, and one of the things that you can do to help yourself in that regard is to replace the plastic gear cover for the aluminum gear cover, and you will get a more concentric seal on the diff housing or the diff gear itself. So that is the first of the important things. The second is making sure that you use black grease when building the diff around the outdrives. So I'll show you where that black grease goes right now. Your outdrives, sorry, I digress. There's something that is important to point out about the outdrives, and that is an area where things build up, track debris builds up between the outdrive and the body of the diff itself. So here's your diff body, here's your outdrive. There's a ring, a rubber O-ring that goes on to the, it's clear plastic, but I think you can see it. So that clear O-ring goes in the outdrive, like so. There's a recess in the side of the diff body here for that O-ring. Slide that in there like that. On the diff cover, same thing, your O-ring, your diff cover, and you push that on there like that. Here's where the issue happens. Debris gets in this little space right here between the outdrive and the diff cover or the diff body housing itself. So when it comes time to rebuild your gear diff, either replacing the seals or just simply changing the fluid or replacing the fluid, you're going to want to remove the outdrive. Don't just take the diff apart and leave the outdrives in there, because you will see a ring of track debris like carpet fiber. If you're running on carpet, you're going to see a literal ring of carpet fiber wrapped around the outdrive shaft that goes inside the diff, and that will cause leaking as it pulls away from the diff housing. So pro tip number 1 is to make sure you remove that dirty ring of carpet stuff. Next, the black grease that comes in the kit, you definitely want to put on a pretty liberal amount around the shaft of the outdrive, and this helps with sealing the O-ring. I rather put on too much and wipe off the excess than not put on enough. So to keep it out of the diff body itself, put it on the outdrive first. Your O-ring is in the diff body, and then you slide it into the diff, and the excess will ooze out the sides like that. Now we can see that there's a little bit of ooze out the side. before I try and wipe it off, I'm going to install the washer's already in there. I'm going to install the pin that holds the outdrive into place, and then I'll remove the excess black grease. There. And you always want to get off as much excess grease from the car as possible, because grease is a magnet for dirt. Dirt is a cause of wear and friction. Friction causes heat and it reduces speed. So again, I'd rather have too much grease and wipe off the excess than not enough. But it's super important to remember to wipe off the excess, because the excess grease will trap and hold dirt, which is no bueno. All right, that half is done. Do the other half the same way. The O-ring is already in place there. I'll put on a liberal amount of this black Stealth lube grease. Goes by a couple of different names. I think if you need to buy a replacement tub of it, I think it's called Stealth grease. Gobbed it on there, kids. O-ring is already in place. Push it through. The O-ring prevents the black grease from getting inside, contaminating your diff fluid. Drop my washer on. Put the pin in place. Wipe off the excess. When putting the pin in place to hold the outdrive on, if you're not paying attention, you may not notice that there is actually a slot built in to the aluminum diff cover that makes aligning the pin much easier. So if we're looking at the top of the case here, there's a little slot cut out right here on one side, and that is to facilitate installing and removing that pin that holds the outdrive in place. Okay, that's in place. Excess black grease removed. Good. All right. Next, this may fall under the category of another pro tip, I'm not sure. Before you drop your sun gear onto the pin and onto the outdrive, put a dab of your diff oil into the body here, into the housing. We do that just to make sure that we're getting grease or diff lube everywhere. So I put enough in there to completely cover the bottom of the diff housing. Cat hair. I don't think I've ever built a diff without cat hair included. There we go. Push it all the way down until the silicone diff lube, diff oil oozes out from under the gear, and you know you're good. Now I'm going to put some more in, because I don't want pockets between the sun gear and the planetary gears. I'll put that in, let that settle for a second. Not only am I using the aluminum diff cover, I'm using the aluminum, what are they called? Brand pack of them around here somewhere. Pins, cross pins. The gear diffs come with plastic cross pins that are actually one piece molded. I've never had one fail, but I'm never going to have one fail because I don't use them. I replace them with the aluminum cross pins. That's what we're going with. We're calling them aluminum cross pins. All right, so I've put diff lube, diff oil in the body covering the sun gear. Now I'll drop my planetary gears down on top. And then you fill up your diff case almost to the top. I think some people get quite OCD about this, in that they will put the empty diff housing on a scale, and they'll ensure that they always add the same amount of diff fluid by weighing it. Once you add the diff fluid, you let it settle for a second, let any air bubbles come out. I like to put a little drop down into each of the slots for the diff pins. And I let it sit for a little while for the air to work its way out. And I also will push down in the center of the aluminum diff pins to hold everything in place. Well, it makes a mess when you do that. I want to rotate them. I'm turning the outdrive slowly, and that is to work the diff fluid through the gears so that everything is completely covered. So I could use another drop onto this diff pin here. And this one. Get those air bubbles out of there. Come on. See? I mean, it's not like bleeding shocks, but you still want to wait till all the air comes out so you have a better idea of the level of fluid that you've got inside your diff case. Let that sit for a little bit. While I'm doing that, I will add a thin layer of diff fluid to the aluminum case and then drop my gasket in place. This is a used diff that I'm rebuilding. I'm putting together a short course truck and I'm waiting for a brand new one to arrive. So in actuality, what I'm doing is I'm putting together a complete second lay down gearbox to have on hand with me. I don't like, rather than like at the track, tear the gearbox apart, pull the diff out, rebuild the diff trackside, or just drop this whole unit in there maybe. If something goes horribly wrong, I got a whole complete spare gearbox. And it will have the same clutch, same slipper clutch. I called it a clutch once. Somebody lost their mind on me. It's not a clutch. It's a slipper. Slipper is short for slipper clutch, millennial. Go away. Put a little drop of diff fluid on there. Rotate it around. Drop the... I'm going to put a little bit on the case, like I said. That may... It perhaps does two things. It for sure holds the gasket in place while I'm reassembling the diff. And it may actually help seal it. I'm not a rocket climatologist, so I don't know. For sure I can say that it will help hold that gasket in place. So we will do our best to get the cat hair out of there. Impossible. pin back up. There. A little bit of, I mean, just enough to say I got it wet on the sun gear. Line everything up onto my case. I don't see any air bubbles in there, so it's good. There we go. Use my MIP nut driver just into the screw holes to center the gasket. Don't want to jam a screw down there with the gasket only halfway in position and rip the gasket by putting a screw through it. Now, if you have ever screwed an aluminum head onto a block, oh, I mean, I'm sure that's not the only thing it applies to, I guess, but that's where I learned it on. You want to put the screws down with an even amount of pressure, tension, torque. I guess you'd be torquing them. In the case of a wheel or an engine, an actual gasoline engine where you're putting the cylinder head on top. To avoid warping, twisting the parts, you screw the bolts in place evenly. So okay, now I've got all four screws started. So to avoid warping any of the parts, I would alternate. A few screws on, a few twists on this one, a few twists on this one, a few twists on this one, a few twists on that one, and keep the pattern. Just going to go until it touches. Then I'll cross back over, trying to keep the pressure equalized across all four. Does it matter? The theory is sound in other automotive assembly components, so why not assume that it helps here to do the same as opposed to tightening down one bolt at a time all the way. We're getting there now, so I'm going to keep repeating the pattern, but a half turn at a time. And of course, these are steel screws into a plastic diff housing. So keep that in mind. And don't go with too many ugga-duggas or Mongo tight. You'll think you've bottomed it out, and then you'll do the other three, and you'll come back and you'll get another eighth or so on the nut driver. See, that one's now done. That one is done. That one's done. That one's done. Yeah, that's 100% done. Nothing. 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 Perfect. All right, there we have it. So that, kids, is how I rebuild my gear diffs. I hope you pick something up from that. If you have any comments, questions, feel free to leave them below. And until next time, thanks for watching.